Armed Services Committee. Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I should say, thanks very much for joining us. Let's get right to what the White House says, the nuclear talks. They say that's a separate issue because of the critical need to keep nuclear arms out of Iranian hands. Do you agree with that compartmentalization? In other words, don't include these other issues as part of these nuclear-related discussions?
No, I think that's impossible to segregate these issues out. And a couple of reasons. Number one is, if the nuclear talks are perfectly successful and achieve our goal of delaying Iran getting a nuclear weapon, it will give them more money through the relief of sanctions to be used for these other activities. So it will fuel the sectarian wars around the Middle East. It will add to the instability because they're going to have a lot more money to do it. Secondly, though, isn't it interesting that in the midst of this delicate phase of these Iranian nuclear negotiations, Iran would choose to dial up the pressure in Yemen to the point of sending this convoy, etc. It just makes you wonder whether they think that they can get away with anything because we want a deal so bad. And I think that mindset tells us a lot about what's happening in Iran right now.
As you know, the Iranians deny that they're shipping weapons, arms to those Shiite Houthi rebels in Yemen. The U.S. doesn't believe it. U.S. officials say, many of your colleagues on the Hill have been briefed on this, say they have no doubt that the Iranians are doing it. What do you know about alleged Iranian arms shipments, potentially in those cargo vessels or warships that might be destined for those Houthi rebels?
Well, obviously, none of us can get involved in disclosing classified information. I will just say, for me personally, I have no doubt that Iran is pulling the strings of the Houthis in Yemen, and they have intentionally dialed up the pressure. I think it is just an interesting comment that they have done so at this time when supposedly the nuclear negotiations were just at such a critical point.
A fair point, indeed. Let's talk about the U.S. military now. Maybe 6 or 8 or 10,000 U.S. sailors and Marines. They've now been deployed in these 9 battleships, warships off the coast of Yemen, including the USS Teddy Roosevelt, an aircraft carrier, the battle group, maybe 6,000 sailors and Marines on that one aircraft carrier alone with a lot of firepower, missiles, aircraft, stuff like that. What are the rules of engagement as far as the U.S. military is concerned if they suspect that one of those Iranian ships does in fact have weapons destined for those Houthi rebels?
Well, the rules of engagement are different depending on where the ships are in the ocean. If they are in international waters, it becomes much more complex to take some sort of assertive action to stop or turn those ships around. If they are in territorial waters of a particular country, then we can have the approval of that country's government, the president, say, of Yemen, to take greater action. But I do think that when you put a lot of what you were just talking about in your previous report together, one of the things for us to think about is that currently Iran controls the straits coming out of the Persian Gulf. If they or their surrogate controls Yemen, in essence they can control the straits coming out of the Red Sea also. And that puts them in control of 2 key areas where shipping is very important, where much of the world's oil is shipped. So I do think that freedom of navigation, of shipping, in the bigger strategic context of what Iran's doing is an important point.
So you think the President, the Pentagon, did the right thing in deploying those warships, that aircraft carrier battle group to the tip of Yemen over there to make sure the passage from the Suez Canal through the Red Sea, that all of that continues to flow smoothly. You support this deployment of military force, military power in that part of the world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake depending on what's in those cargo ships, resupplying the Houthis, but there's also a lot at stake in making sure that Iran is not in control of these 2 very strategic places through which much of the world's shipping traverses.
Mac Thornberry is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome, sir.
Still ahead, Iran says U.S. strategy is ineffective and that Iranian forces are